Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. Just letting a few more people in and then we'll get started. Okay, so I think we'll get started as we've got a lot to get through. So hi everyone, welcome along to the latest in our series of Circular Economy Hub webinars. I'm Fiona Charnley, I'm a Professor of Circular Innovation and Co-Director of the Circular Economy Hub. And for those of you who have been to previous webinars, you'll know that they cover a broad range of topics related to the circular economy. This webinar is a little bit different because we're going to deep dive into some of our own research that's been taking place as part of the hub on circular economy roadmaps, and this marks the official launch of our circular economy roadmap dashboard that Khalid is going to share with you. But before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping notes. So the webinar is being recorded and that will be made available via our website afterwards for you to share with any colleagues who might not have been able to make it. If you don't wish to be included in the recording, please keep your cameras off. And also if you could keep your microphones off while Khalid is speaking and presenting, but then please do ask any questions either through the chat function or raise your hand at the end of the session, and we'll make sure that we leave time for Q&A. So really excited to introduce Dr. Khalid Abu Bakr, who is one of our own research fellows in the Circular Economy Hub. And Khalid has been conducting research over the last 2 years on circular economy roadmaps and has done an extensive amount of work in this area. And today he's going to present that work to you and also share with you the dashboard that has been launched, and you'll have opportunity to see that and how it works and then ask questions at the end. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Khalid.
Thank you very much, Fiona. And hello, everybody, and welcome to the webinar. Let me share my screen and start. Okay. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can.
That's just excellent. Okay, so thank you very much, Fiona, for the introduction, and welcome everybody. So this essentially our presentation is going to be twofold. I would start by taking you through the journey that led to the development of the dashboard, the different sort of approach that I took, the different documents that I accessed, and the method or the methodology that I adopted in distilling these documents and extracting information and informing sort of data frames from these documents to inform the development of the dashboard. So I start by sort of touching on road mapping, essentially the basic principles of road mapping. Every time I talk to people, those that already have some experience in road mapping of a sort, or have been involved in any kind of long-range planning, I always find that people define road mapping slightly differently. But then I sort of looked at different definitions and different sort of documents that have been developed to achieve the objective of a roadmap, and this is the definition that I come up with. On the right, you can see some of the very, very principles, the absolute common denominator of roadmaps, or what I would say long-range planning documents that delineate a particular sector, which is where we have the focus area, and then certain actions and these are very definitive actions that are linked to those focus areas or those priority areas. And then there are also some practical implementation strategies with metrics and sort of a long-term kind of KPI that defines success. So anything at all that is out there that is designed to deliver those objectives in that sort of regimented fashion, to me, is considered as a roadmap, although the authors wouldn't always refer to these as roadmaps. So this is a very, very important sort of clarification, because later in this presentation, I'll explain what different types of documents informed the development of the dashboard. So essentially, roadmap or road mapping is a strategic planning process that helps organizations or different entities to identify and prioritize pathways and actions that can facilitate a transition towards a circular economy model. And what it does is that it outlines certain steps, and those steps have to be regimented, including certain goals, vision, lines, and the resources needed, stakeholders, and so on and so forth, in order to deliver on the road mapping objective. Looking at the evolution of roadmaps, this work gave me access to about 700 odd documents, some of which are actually roadmaps by definition. Others are just strategy documents, action plans, which are not as deep and detailed as what I would traditionally define as a roadmap, but then they meet that common criteria. They share those sort of the common denominators that I mentioned. And the origins of roadmaps, so the road mapping actually originated back in the 70s, some of the early roadmaps, and these are all very specific roadmaps, and they are technology roadmaps. The likes of Robert Fowle, for example, have written quite extensively on some of these early roadmaps. And then as circular economy became a sort of a global concept, we began to see more and more roadmaps adapted towards the delivery of circular economy objectives. But then most of these early roadmaps are quite waste focused, and sort of towards recycling, rather than considering all of the principles of circular economy that we know today. And then that called for standardization. So certain standards are beginning to sort of find their ways into the development of these roadmaps. And then roadmaps became very, very diverse. So the roadmaps that are developed for the nation, so national roadmaps, the regional roadmaps, there are sector-specific roadmaps, and so on and so forth. And now contemporary roadmaps are now beginning to assume some of these characters. They're looking a lot more sophisticated, and then sort of they represent all the different facets of circular economy that we know. And then future roadmaps would now begin to become more collaborative in nature, because as we know, circular economy isn't confined within any borders. It's a global phenomenon. So these are some of the early adopters of circular economy roadmaps. China, some of these roadmaps are quite waste-centric, as I mentioned. And then around 2016, we have the Nordic countries adopting this and sort of like actually setting the pace. So countries like Finland, for example, they have got some of the most influential and most comprehensive roadmaps that have actually set the standards for other countries to follow. The Netherlands and other countries have actually also produced really, really impactful roadmaps, and now it's becoming more and more of a governmental initiative and assuming more of a global character now. So in roadmaps, my work looked into some of the constituents of roadmaps. When you look into a roadmap, although these roadmaps don't intentionally or deliberately refer to some of these schools of thoughts or some of these theoretical underpinnings, but what I saw in roadmaps is all the different parts of roadmaps actually draw from all of these theories and disciplines listed here on this slide. So we've got strategic management, which defines the purpose and goals of the roadmap, strategic scoping and collaboration, stakeholder engagement, stakeholder analysis, collaboration ecosystem. These are all parts of the what makes up a functional roadmap. And as you can see, they're all drawn from different disciplines. So as I said, my work looked into over about 700 different roadmaps, but about 900, close to about 400 roadmaps made it into the dashboard. So information was distilled from about 400 different roadmaps. And when I say roadmaps, I mean those documents that define a journey towards achieving circularity at a national level, at a sectoral level, or city level, or even sort of regional level, that have the common denominator that I defined earlier on. And all of these documents, in the process of this presentation, I'll explain the constituents for all these different documents. So it spans about 121 countries, covers about 57 priority areas, which include sectors and other priorities, and 144 cities globally. Some stats about the roadmaps that we looked into. So this is sort of like a regional outlook, and this would be presented in a more detailed sort of fashion in the dashboard. So we've got waste management policies, product policies, circular economy specific policies, and the number of roadmaps that the countries have developed. And we can see Europe is leading with roadmap count compared with so waste management policies, active waste management policy in Europe compared to other countries, actually quite low. Again, we look at the proliferation of roadmaps over time. The early roadmaps, like I said, were developed around 2013, and you can see the trajectory by type. So the different types of roadmaps, you can see the national roadmaps. So governments globally are actually spearheading the development of national roadmaps. And not all of these are national roadmaps. Some of them are just national strategies that are specific to the country's dominant economic activities. And we've got the city types roadmaps, like, for example, the London route map, the Glasgow circular economy roadmap, the West Midlands, the Brighton and Hove roadmaps. So all of these constitute this trajectory. So you can see it's actually on the rise. And then if we look at the maturity of these roadmaps, as in what are the timelines of these roadmaps, you can see that most of the earlier roadmaps are set to mature or to actually achieve circularity for those particular sectors delineated within those roadmaps around 2030, with national roadmaps being the sectoral roadmaps, followed by regional roadmaps like the European Union Action Plan, for example. And then we've got the municipal types of roadmaps. And then the next sort of spike is around 2050. So these are the two distinct periods of sort of roadmap maturity, essentially. Again, looking at them from a regional perspective, all of these will be seen in detail in the dashboard. So we can see, looking over here, the density of roadmap, Europe constitutes about 50% of all of the global roadmaps developed. And then we're looking at what are the motivations behind the development of these roadmaps. Are these about business models, or are these about environmental sort of issues, about looking into inefficiencies, so on and so on? Are these financial motivations, or are they towards achieving or ticking some of these SDG boxes? And every roadmap actually defines their motivation. Some of them quite inadvertently, but then the process of using natural language processing was able to categorize the motivations behind some of these roadmaps into these sort of categories. Again, looking at global priorities with national roadmaps, sustainable waste management, with regional roadmaps, we have bioeconomy, municipal roadmaps. The typical priorities are, again, sustainable waste management. We've got resource efficiency, food and beverage. We look at the baseline types of roadmaps, and then there are also sectoral roadmaps. Construction roadmap is actually leading in sectoral roadmaps. Okay, we look again into all these roadmaps, the dominant circular economy principles among these roadmaps. Like I said, for example, waste-centric roadmaps were some of the earlier roadmaps, and that is evidence around recycling. Here we can see recycling actually dominates. So we've got recycling, we've got reduce, and the least dominant is remanufacturing. So we've got remanufacturing. So very, very few roadmaps actually dedicate their actions to the principle of remanufacturing. And this is the outlook again here in the UK. So we look, I did talk a lot initially about the different types of roadmaps. So this is an extract from one of the papers that I published around the typological framework for roadmaps, that most roadmaps are national, but then in that hierarchy, we have municipal or regional roadmaps, and there are baseline roadmaps that are often referring to specific materials, resources, or particular sectors. This is the typological framework of the phases of road mapping. So it starts with phase one, which is the scoping and goal setting. The baseline process, which is where you perform some diagnosis of the establishing, we call the situational picture, before beginning to engage stakeholders in collaboration, and then you go ahead to develop the roadmap, implement, and define some pilots based on the actions or based on the priority areas, and then start to implement those pilots. Okay, so I would now move on to share my screen and take you through the dashboard, and then I'll leave enough time after that for question and answers. But in the meantime, I'll be really happy if anybody to answer any questions at all while I begin. I sort of try to launch the dashboard. Thank you.
I think there's just one question at the moment, Khalid, from Jack Barry. So Jack's asking for you to clarify our national economic strategies, which include reference to circular economy, considered a roadmap in this exercise.
Sorry, bear with me. I'm just trying to do that too. Sorry, yes, what's the question?
Just about how you've, what type of documents or roadmaps you included. So the specific question is, our national economic strategies, which refer to CE, included? Okay, yeah, so I think that question would be answered in the next phase of this presentation. So there would be a plot within dashboard that would sort of delineate all the different documents that define the long-range planning efforts of every country. So you see all the different documents, the types of documents that was able to extract all of this information from, including the United Kingdom. Okay, great. Thanks, Khalid. Stop sharing this. You can start sharing. Got a slow internet, so bear with me. Is my screen visible? Yeah, we can see that. We see the dashboard. Excellent. Okay, thank you very much. So this is the dashboard. Again, a bit of a caveat here. There's a lot of the information from this is not sort of directly found within these roadmaps. A lot of the information are actually distilled using natural language processing. And also the definition of the roadmap here is the definition that I gave at the beginning. So these are not all of the documents that sort of provided insight to this dashboard are actually referred to, not all these documents refer to themselves as roadmaps, essentially. So this is essentially the product of a natural language processing where all of this information is extracted from the existing documents. And also there is an augmentation of data. So part of this was informed by the existing roadmaps, and part of it is also informed by existing metrics, so quantitative metrics found on sites like the OECD, the World Bank, the United Nations, that are pertaining to the countries featured in the dashboard. So essentially the data, the metrics are actually augmented with the road mapping insight in order to actually present a secondary insight for you to be able to sort of to interpret anyhow you want to. So anyway,
Going into the first plot, this shows us the regional variables. So we've got variables, some of the road mapping variables that are extracted from road maps for each region against some of the metrics that I'm talking about, some of the augmented data set sort of obtained from other sources. So this is essentially all the countries features on the roadmap, using their longitudes and latitudes. So we can see this Africa, that's Europe, and so on and so on. These are the countries that have actually developed their own roadmaps or a long-range sort of document of any sort. Now, if we should then go and see the countries according to the number of roadmaps they have developed, when you take this variable, so we can see the size of the bubble shows us the number of sort of long-range strategy towards circular economy that these countries have actually developed, so in form of a roadmap or other documents. Straight away, we can see that Europe has actually developed far more than, and then that goes to corroborate what I shared with you earlier on, the fact that Europe alone actually has developed about 50% of all of the roadmaps developed globally. Now, there are the variables here that I extracted from, that I obtained from other sources, are some of the indicators. If we were to say, for example, to look at each country's, say, material productivity, rather than placing them longitudinally or latitudinally, against the material footprint, for example, per capita. So in an ideal world, we would like to see more productivity, less sort of footprint. And we can see that a lot of the countries that are on the higher end of material productivity and lower end of material footprint per capita, which essentially is a really good indicator. It's a good sort of indicator of the fact that circularity is actually coming to fruition, for example. This is by no means a scientific conclusion, but then at least it's a correlation. It shows that there is a relationship between the development of roadmaps and material productivity. For example, this is the Netherlands, and the Netherlands, that we all know, are quite progressive. They've developed a significant amount of roadmaps. So we have the count here. We've got about 31 counts of different strategies that they've developed as a nation. Switzerland, we've got the United Kingdom here, and you can see predominantly they've got some of the larger bubbles. But then in contrast, we've got some other countries here, although they have lower, relatively lower footprint, but then their productivity isn't quite as high as these ones. So again, this is quite nuanced, and I would leave the interpretation, because there are so many other confounding variables. We can't draw any scientific conclusion with this, but at least it gives us a picture of what's going on. We can again select other variables here and see whether or not we can see any correlation. If we look at CE policies by country, that changes the sizes of the bubbles. Okay, say again, some of the leading countries have got a lot of CE policies. We can look into product policy, or the number of priority sectors. The number of priority sectors by country. So the second plot here, which is a choropleth, essentially it's a two-way sort of visualization. So one visualizes the density of roadmaps, or the density of a sort of circular economy policy of a sort, shows us the color on the map, and then the bubble is the other variable in the other drop down. So for example, if we look at the roadmap count per country, or per, so this is Canada, this is the United States, and the Nordic countries, as we can see, the United Kingdom. So this shows us that each of those countries has developed, I mean, the darker the color, the more the number of roadmaps that they've developed. We take other variables, and it changes the color of the country. And then we can now visualize by looking again at some of the different variables here. For example, if we say, let's look at plastic waste per capita. And this is what it shows us. Again, it's a visualization. You look at, so this is the circular economy effort. This is the country's, the size of the country's waste per capita. We can look at things such as food waste composition of the country's municipal solid waste, for example, and the size of the bubble shows us that. So this is just purely a visualization of these metrics on top of the country's circular economy efforts. We go down here. This is featuring all of the attributes of the roadmaps that were distilled from the different documents. So if we pick a country, for example, the United States, United Kingdom, we've got this number of documents that are developed at the city level or municipal level, national documents, again, that delineate those steps towards achieving circularity at national level, 40% baseline and then sectoral. If we look again at the natural language processing extracted motivations behind these roadmaps, we can see the environmental motivations, economic, SDG, financial, ecological, business related motivations or society. The document types, this probably answers the question or attempts to answer the question. So roadmaps are documents that are actually referred to as roadmaps or route maps, for example, constitute about 20% of all the documents that contributed to this dashboard for the United Kingdom. Strategies, policy briefs, sector reports, action plans, technical papers and reports, and sort of general reports. The years that these papers were developed, so the first of these types of documents were developed around 2014, right to the last accessed documents, which was, so this data was actually capped at 2021. You look at the priority areas within the UK, again, we see construction, we see sustainable waste management echoing the global strategy, global priorities, and so on and so forth. Plastic, but metals and minerals. We pick another country, we would be able to visualize all of these metrics. Again, we look at the different agencies that have authored these documents. For example, government authored documents constitutes 22% of all the Netherlands roadmaps. So look, putting all of these things together begin to give us a bit of a pattern in the development of these sort of strategies. Where are the efforts, for example, coming from? So these are the local authorities, national consortium, so different organizations nationally coming together, global consortium, the likes of Ellen MacArthur Foundation, for example, partnering with other organizations, and so on and so forth. And I looked at this also differently regionally, and regionally we see that the patterns or the pattern of agencies authoring these these roadmaps actually changes from region to region. Some regions have actually got a dominance of global agencies actually authoring the roadmaps, and other regions have got like a more sort of national efforts being the most predominant one. Yep, again, you can go through all of these things and look at the implementation year, for example. So most of Netherlands roadmaps 2050 or 2030 reach maturity. So this is our fourth plot that looks at the roadmap attributes by typology. So it looks at the country by typology. So the United Kingdom, for example, pick another country. For example, and so on and so forth. We look into different countries. Japan is also one with very, very heavy municipal presence compared with national efforts. We can look at that the same by priority areas again. So national roadmaps of sustainable waste management. So this is a breakdown of what we saw here, so that we can see that although the sustainable waste management forms the dominant sector or priority of the UK, 54% of it is actually national, 38% is municipal, and so on and so forth. You can pick another priority, for example, if you take food and beverage, this is the distribution. This is where we look at the 20 countries by typology. So it picks up 20 countries by typology. Over here, we've got supposed to be interactive, but I seem to be struggling to interact with it. Okay, say, can just zoom into maybe these countries. We can see municipal, national, so comparing countries by seeing the number of roadmaps or the different types of roadmaps that they've developed. We can look at them by document types. So here we're actually comparing 20 countries as opposed to having a single country in the previous plot. We go to the 6th plot, which focuses on the priority areas regionally or sub-regionally, regionally by country or by city. So sub-regionally, if we pick, say, for example, Northern Europe, again, we can see the distribution of the priorities where most of the efforts are sort of focusing on. So again, we've got sustainable waste management, followed by construction, food and beverage, plastics, food waste, and so on and so forth, right down to sharing economy as a priority. If we go down to regions, again, not only has Europe developed more roadmaps than the rest of the world, but then you can see that the share of priorities by Europe alone is actually more than half of the entire world sort of put together. So you can see that these are different priorities. Again, in Europe, construction is a big priority. Food and beverage is a big priority. General resource efficiency, which is such a vague priority, is also quite dominant. Bioeconomy, plastics, and so on and so forth. And then these are Asia priorities. And then we can look at it by country, looking at the priorities within the United Kingdom, again, or we can look at it by city. Again, pick up the United Kingdom, we can break it down into, and by city here, I mean anything that is a subset of the United Kingdom. So this is a very general term, so apologies to people from Scotland and Wales. I called Scotland a city, but it's not I don't mean it's actually a city in that sense, but it's a subset of the United Kingdom, and Wales here as well. So we look at Wales again from all the different documents. So construction and demolition, waste, material recovery, these are the top priorities extracted from existing roadmaps. This is a plot that looks into the food value chain. So it cuts across all the stages of the food value chain and look into areas where there are inefficiencies, for example, where there is food waste or food loss. And here I define food waste as a systemic issue, whereas food waste becomes a behavioral issue, whereas food loss is a systemic issue. We can see that the global south, or most of the countries in Africa, for example, are suffering at the farm stage of their value chain, which goes to tell us that this is actually a systemic issue. They don't have efficiencies at this stage to protect food from food loss. So they lose food, food loses its value before it actually gets to the market, before it gets to retail. Whereas when you compare that with other countries, would see that, for example, India, storage level, that is where they have most of their issues. And just trying to find the United States. I think this is the United States. So zooming into the United States, you can see that the early stages, they are quite efficient. So they do not record as much loss at the early stages as they do, for example, at the retail stage or at the household stage. So this is one of the value chains where there is enough data to actually be able to represent all the different stages of the value chain. So we could then focus on top 20 countries and compare top 20 countries in terms of where they record the highest loss, at what stage of the value chain they record the highest loss. So this actually marks the final plot of the dashboard. There are other spin-offs, essentially derivatives of these, sort of where I would like to go a little bit deeper into a particular plot. So I've created several different dashboards, but then unfortunately that's not actually a subject of today's webinar. And some of those dashboards are actually under development, where we actually delve deeper into specific value chains and comparing different countries. So that's me. Thank you very much for listening. And I would stop sharing now and open up for questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Khalid, for such a comprehensive presentation. Yeah, it's a lot of work, and it's really great to see it in such an accessible format across all those different plots. So we've got a few questions in the chat. Priya, I wondered, you've got a couple of questions. I wonder if you're there and happy to come on and ask Khalid yourself.
Hi, Khalid, can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you loud and clear, yes.
That's a fantastic dashboard. Thank you. That's an excellent starting point. I'm doing my PhD on circular economy for e-waste management of critical materials. So when you have the document numbers there, especially I see you have an EU bucket, and you also have a Germany bucket, a France bucket, a Netherlands bucket, for instance. So when you count the documents, are you considering revisions of existing policies, so just the latest policy or every revision? And a lot of times there's a roadmap, and then the EU passes a bill, and then it's sent to the country, and then a policy is written. Are you also looking into what policies go into which roadmap?
That is a very, very good question. So I looked into these things separately. So most of these documents don't have any, it's really difficult to actually be able to extract specific policies. So the policies are just policy counts, not policies related to particular sort of roadmap or particular priorities identified. So these would be, for example, a whole data set on policies that most of the policy related data was actually secondary data obtained, say, from Chatham House, for example, countries that have developed policy specific one, and these are not. So these data sets have actually been verified and checked for veracity by the source organizations. So I try not to duplicate what has been done already. So I don't, when I started looking to these roadmaps, I decided to actually, I'm just going to look at them just as roadmaps. Because I know there've been data sets out there about specific policies. So what I would do is I would juxtapose a policy by country, see how many different policies these countries have developed. But then so that when I'm extracting variables on these roadmaps, I don't look for policies specific. I just look for, okay, so what are these priorities that these countries have? So there would often be, say, if you take the Netherlands, they would have a roadmap that, say, for example, Amsterdam, there would be a revision of the roadmap, but then the natural language processing process would not duplicate a particular priority. So if a revision has an additional priority, then that additional priority would be added to Netherlands. So Netherlands would not count, so would not say the construction sector, for example, was a priority in this previous roadmap. And in the next program, we've already accounted for construction as a key priority in the Netherlands. And then another identified priority sector or priority area would be added if a
so you just keep populating the difference.
Exactly, absolutely.
Okay, great. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thanks for your question, Priya. And Lena, you've got a couple of questions, if you won't mind coming on and asking if you're there.
Yeah, sure, not a problem. Thank you, Khalid. It was very, very interesting. My questions are all related to roadmaps. Are a lot of work goes into creating the roadmaps, but how are they then measured and determined to be if they're effective? Not only, how many are just created and then sit on a shelf versus those that are created and then actually seen through to maturity. And then the second part is, how effective are they at implementing and implementing change to a circular economy?
Amazing question again. Thank you very much. So again, I think if I mentioned at the beginning that my work is twofold. So looking into sort of giving it a bit of a snapshot of what's happening out there. So what this dashboard does is does not attempt in any way, shape, or form to say this roadmap has actually led to A, B, or C realization of certain KPIs or anything like that at all. So the first plot, for example, that I shared, that I explained, I did mention that I got the efforts that they're doing, the development efforts of these roadmaps, and then I obtained independent data set from somewhere else to see whether or not there's any evidence to show the adoption, to show what is actually bearing any fruit. So say, is there any indication of a reduction in material footprint per capita, for example? So these are the only indicators. As we all know, having any specifically measured circular economy indicator out there in the form of a ready-to-use data is like witchcraft. There's no such thing. It's really, really difficult to actually come by. So this is by proxy. So what I got, the data that I got is by proxy to see whether there's such correlation. As we saw, there isn't any scientific evidence to show that these efforts are actually yielding A, B, or C. Your other question about whether roadmaps are actually effective at that question is still out there. The jury is still out there, because a lot of the people that I've interacted with have tried and failed. Some have actually given up completely. Some are saying that roadmaps are a complete waste of time. But then the conclusion that I draw is that is actually roadmaps. So they do all of these things. The people that start, there's no proper governance. There's no proper sort of stakeholder sort of collaboration. They don't have a really good collaboration ecosystem where every useful player is given a role, okay, and to see to it that every sort of action is linked to the priorities and it's measurable with proper metrics, and there are defined KPIs at the end of the period. So we want to achieve circularity A, B, or C by 2050. These are our KPIs. You can't draw a line. So everything is fragmented from the roadmaps that I've seen, right? And some very, very few roadmaps, as you saw in that sort of graph, have actually attained have actually attained maturity yet, right? But then anecdotally, people that have developed roadmaps or people that are in the process they're very skeptical about these things. And so one of the work that I'm doing, so the second half of my work is to look into this and develop a strategy, develop a framework, which is currently, or it has actually been done, being tested in so many different use cases. How do we methodically implement these different steps in order to make sure that this problem is solved, that we can actually trace all the process and achieve circularity at the end of the process? So it's globally so, and I'm sure there are so many different other entities that are devoted.
Yeah, it's important to from what you're saying, then a roadmap is just one part of the you have the roadmap, but then you need the next parts of that to support the roadmap. Roadmap is not a standalone.
No, far from it. The roadmap is actually all it does is spells out the steps. So that is that. It gives you, it identifies the stakeholders, it defines the priorities, it sort of recommends pilots, for example. Once you say, okay, we've identified these different areas, we've identified these value chains, we've identified these processes, for example. So these are our actions that we're going to implement with an implementation strategy, right? We've got our KPIs. This is how we're going to measure these things. So that is what the roadmap is about.
Great. Thanks, Lena. Really good question. And we have Jack. Do you want to come on and ask Khalid your questions?
Yes, hello everyone, and thanks very much, Khalid. That's I think it's a very interesting approach, seeing the opportunities of scraping and natural language processing to really cut across the whole landscape, this really dynamic and evolving landscape that is CE. So I really value this piece of work. Although it's early stages, you're still working through how to where to go with this. But I think as a foundation, it's very valuable. And I think in your second goal to see how we can really measure the actual impact and progress, I think is a very valuable secondary goal. My intuition is that it's too early yet for those impacts to be to be measured. That will take several years, if not decades, for kind of material footprint to reduce in line, and then it's very difficult to extrapolate whether these roadmaps actually link to them. But I've probably worth flagging that there's several countries now that in their roadmaps have committed to regular monitoring intervals, so every 1 year, every 3 year, by an independent institution. So whether that's an environmental agency, for example, in the Netherlands, PBL, the Dutch Environmental Agency, now have the mandate to interrogate every year the progress on their strategy. So I'm seeing more and more in the more recent roadmaps that these kind of interministerial coalitions plus monitoring approaches are being put in place. But it's so early days that there's going to be no data yet to determine that. But some sort of framework to measure at the global level, I think, is extremely valuable. And yeah, really, really willing to engage with that discussion and see how we could collaborate on that.
That'll be amazing. Thank you very much, Jack. I mean, yeah, absolutely. What you said is actually spot on. And part of the efforts actually that we're doing with my team is to, so in the road mapping framework, so there are within the phases, I think some of the sort of the halfway to the end phases, there are calls for monitoring. So there's actually a layer called the monitoring layer, because you've got to monitor these things. And also when defining the priorities and the actions, there are, we call, again, this is where we define, or we define metrics differently from we define KPIs. So KPIs, we see them as the overarching end goal of that, where we actually be able to say, to quantify the progress in achieving circularity. But then at different points related to specific actions, specific priority areas, we would have metrics, we'd have measurements there. So these are the would-be metrics where we'd be constantly monitoring how we're able to achieve those micro circularity related to particular priority areas based on the actions that we've taken, or based on some pilots, for example. So that is where we have that's why we have pilots at some point, so that at least we begin to see that before we get to that sort of that end goal. So yeah, but I think your point is quite valid.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and following the work that you're doing at Chatham House with interest, because we also see a lot of commonalities and opportunities to collaborate. So thanks, Jack. Nicola, are you there? Would you like to come and ask Khalid your question?
Yes, hello. Maybe a little bit unexpected. I'm currently, thank you for this webinar. I would like to mention that first. My question was more about coming from Serbia, from the Balkan region. The usage of the roadmaps, is it useful only for governments and government institutions, or what is the usage for private companies, innovative companies? Can they use the roadmaps to better themselves in the fields of circular economy? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Nicola, yeah, that's another good question. So as I think I mentioned very, very briefly about the typology. So the paper, I don't know if one of my colleagues can share a link to that publication, which essentially defines the different types. So yes, governments, and you can again see from the ensemble of authors of these documents. Some come from governments, some come from consortia, some come from different agencies. So it's sort of, you know, it's not just governments that develop roadmaps. Sectors develop roadmaps. You know, sort of even subsets of sectors, for example, within, say, the construction industry, they could just identify a particular compound within construction and then develop a roadmap for that. So these are baseline roadmaps, for example, roadmaps that are heavily dependent on scientific processes, on processes such as life cycle assessment, for example, chemical processes, and so on and so forth. These constitute some of the baseline roadmaps that I have seen. So products, value chains as a whole, or stages of value chains, all sort of, there could be, they can all develop a roadmap. So yeah, the typology does not restrict just to national or government sort of level. There are different governance levels for road mapping.
And I think also
I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Nicola. And I think also the dashboard is really useful, not only at highlighting and your paper at highlighting how organisations can develop their own roadmaps, but actually looking at benchmarking, depending on where they are kind of in the world, what region they're from, kind of how their own strategies align with those of kind of the local region or kind of sector, their sector. So I think it's useful for that. I've got some other questions in the chat. Gary, you've asked a couple of questions. If you are there to come on.
I am. Apologies if it buffers. I've had a bit of buffering. Yeah, a couple of questions. I think you've kind of answered the one with the link to the paper around methodology. So I'll have a look at that. The other question was, did you see any consistency in terms of the way that either cities or regions are measuring their circularity? Obviously, I know about the Amsterdam methodology. Are others using anything similar? And do you have a view on the Amsterdam and potentially others if you come across them?
Yeah, there are some benchmarks there. Again, in the paper, I did cite some of the really good practices, some of the benchmarks. City specifically, I think Amsterdam, Rotterdam, and I think the West Midlands here in the UK, the Brighton and Hove roadmap, for example, definitely the Glasgow roadmap. So some of they're really thorough, and also I think they've all performed a sort of a baseline assessment. So they've established a situational picture, and it's not about sort of, a lot of roads are quite anecdotal, or they're quite speculative as well. So we identify these without any kind of baselining work at all to identify and prioritize those areas. But then see, these roadmaps that I have mentioned have actually been working. They've got stakeholders on the ground. They have got a really solid collaboration sort of ecosystem where when they identify a priority area, there's a lot of baseline work performed to establish that baseline, that situational picture. I can't list all of the best practice roadmaps, but these are some of them. As a country sort of roadmap, I think, of course, the Central roadmap is actually one of the first. When I started this, that was the first thing that Fiona shared with me, and I had a look at the roadmap, and they've obviously they have set the pace, and a lot have actually sort of emulated what they have done. So that is one of, and then there are different types completely structurally different. You can still identify some of these areas that I mentioned, a particular lens to really try and identify these patterns in these roadmaps. Really difficult to actually take any two roadmaps and see any patterns at all, so. But then if you know what you're looking for in roadmaps, and you pick a good roadmap, then you'll be able to identify some of these, what I refer to as the common denominators, those areas that actually define a really good roadmap.
Okay, thank you. Very useful.
Great, thanks very much, Gary.
Was I audible? I think.
Yeah, you did. You broke up a little bit, but we could pretty much gather what you were saying.
My network today. Yeah, I'm having serious network problems experiencing. So I'm hoping that everything was delivered.
Yeah, it's all come across more or less clearly. So I think we've got one other question from Elaine, if you're there, Elaine. If anyone else has got questions, we've probably got time for one more, so please put up your hand.
Hi, I'm here. Thank you very much. That is absolutely brilliant, Khalid. I think my question might be a little bit niche, but maybe we could pick this up offline. But we're just at the early stages of evolving the UK concrete industries roadmap, effectively, for circular economy. But it's an evolution of the resource efficiency action plans, which I think, just quickly skimming your paper, would have been included in this data. But so really what I'm wanting to know is how useful is this going to be for us in terms of evolving and benchmarking against other really specific material roadmaps or planned activity, I'm going to say, with regards to the very many areas relating to circular economy. We've already identified very broad markers. Might be a bit niche, but I think that it's all of these things need to happen at every scale, don't they? In terms of the circular economy plans for us all bringing them together. I think you might have missed some of that in your.
The network is actually playing up a lot. So I don't know if I captured everything you said, but if am I right to think that we asking about how are we able to sort of I don't know. Can you repeat that? Can you sort of summarize it? And I hope that the network would.
Fiona, you might want to take a steer and say, is this too niche? Should we take it offline? And I contact Khalid separately.
Yeah, I mean, it would be great to follow up with you, Elaine, but I think one of the things that the dashboard does is Khalid took into account a lot of sector-specific roadmaps. So I think the one that you were talking about would have been factored into this. And actually through the dashboard, you can search by material flow or sector, so type of roadmaps that focus on particular sectors. So construction, for example, you could search by that and look at what kind of globally is happening within that particular sector.
Okay, brilliant. But I think it sounds like it might be useful. Maybe we could arrange something to look at that a bit detailed to see how that we can fit into that work. That'd be fantastic. Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. And also although I've got about 57 priorities identified for all these roadmaps, that doesn't mean 57 roadmaps. So for example, if say we've got about 10 or say 100 countries prioritizing construction, that doesn't mean that 100 countries have actually developed a roadmap for the construction sector. It means that in their generic roadmaps that they've developed, or policies or strategies that they have developed, they have cited or they have actually identified construction as a priority, and they are beginning to circularize the construction sector. So there are action plans within the circular economy plan amongst other action plans, but then towards that particular sector. So that is how I came by all of the different sectors and priorities.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that question, Elaine. And I think we are coming to the end of the session. Jack's got a final comment about making this more inclusive so that we can possibly include non-translated roadmaps, so those that aren't currently available in English. Which is definitely something that we could take on as a next step. And obviously some of the other comments around the impact of these roadmaps is something that we're also really interested in following up with. But thank you all so much for your engagement, some really fantastic questions. Really good to see such diversity of people on the call today. It's obviously a very popular topic, and also thank you to Khalid so much for covering such an extensive area in a really comprehensive way. I think the dashboard's a fantastic tool to really explore this area in more detail and across such a breadth as well. As I mentioned earlier, this has been recorded, so it will be available on the website for you to watch again or to share with colleagues that might be interested. And we also have a number of roadmaps, resources that we have signposted to in the chat that are available on the Circular Economy Hub Knowledge platform, which I advise you all to go and have a look at. So thank you very much. Thank you to Khalid especially, and we look forward to seeing you at our future webinars, of which we've got plenty coming up this year. We've got a lot to get through, so look forward to seeing you all soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.